All right, let's talk about a word that sounds, kind of complicated. Economics. But I promise you, it's not just about boring charts and numbers. At its heart, it's really the story of us. It's about your choices, your day, your life. So let's dive in.
I mean, we've all been there, right? You want that new gadget, but you also got to save for that trip you've been planning. Or you want to just stay up all night and binge watch that new series, but you know you have to get up for work in the morning. Money, time, energy, it just never feels like there's quite enough to go around.
Well, that feeling, that tension of having to choose one thing over another, that's not just you. That is the core problem that the entire field of economics was basically invented to figure out.
Which brings us perfectly to our first big idea here. It all comes down to choice. Because when you strip everything else away, economics is simply the science of how we make decisions. Now, the official term for this whole dilemma is scarcity. And this one idea, seriously, is the bedrock of all economics. Just think about it. Our wants are basically infinite, but we live on a planet with a finite, limited amount of stuff. That fundamental mismatch is what forces every single one of us and whole countries to make choices.
So, when economists talk about our unlimited wants, they usually break them down into two simple buckets. First, you have your needs. These are the absolute must-haves for survival, right? Food, water, a roof over your head. Then you have your wants. That's, well, pretty much everything else. The gadgets, the vacations, the things that just make life a bit more fun. Our whole economic life is basically a constant juggle between those two.
Okay, so if economics is all about studying our choices, how do we actually go about it? Well, you can think of it like having two different camera lenses, one for the close-up shots and one for the massive wide-angle views.
But first, here's a cool little tidbit. The word economics itself. It comes from the ancient Greek word oikonomia, which literally means household management. So the next time you're sitting down trying to figure out your budget or making a grocery list, you're not just adulting, you're practicing economics in its most pure original form. Pretty cool, huh?
So those two lenses are microeconomics and macroeconomics. Micro is the magnifying glass. It zooms way in on the small scale, individual decisions. Like, why did you decide to buy that specific brand of coffee? Or how does one single company decide what to charge for its products? Then there's macroeconomics. That's the satellite view. It zooms way out to look at the whole shebang. A country's total income, unemployment rates, international trade, the really big picture stuff.
So, we've gone from your personal choices to the two ways we study them. Now let's zoom out even further and look at how entire societies get organized to deal with that big problem of scarcity.
And it turns out, believe it or not, that every single society in history, from the smallest tribe to the biggest superpower, has to answer the exact same four fundamental questions. What are we going to make? How are we going to make it? Who are we making it for? And how much of it should we produce? How a society answers these four questions, well, that defines its entire economic system.
And broadly speaking, there are three main ways to answer those questions. In a pure market economy, it's all about individuals and businesses making their own decisions. In a command economy, a central government is in charge and calls all the shots. But in the real world, pretty much every country today has what's called a mixed economy. It's a blend of both, trying to get the freedom of the market with the stability and oversight of a government.
And you can't really talk about a market economy without mentioning this guy, Adam Smith. He's often called the father of modern economics. His big idea was summed up in the French phrase laissez-faire, which basically means let it be. He argued that economies work best when people and businesses are free to do their own thing with minimal government getting in the way.
Okay, let's get down to brass tacks. We've talked about these big systems and choices, but what about the actual, stuff, the things we make and buy? This is where production and consumption come into play.
These two are super simple but incredibly important. Production is just making things, goods and services. Consumption is using those things. They're two sides of the very same coin. I mean, you literally can't have one without the other. This back and forth, this constant dance between what we make and what we use is what fuels the entire economy.
So here's a super important rule about consumption that has a bit of a fancy name, the law of diminishing marginal utility. Let's make it simple. Imagine you're starving and someone gives you a warm piece of panda sol. Oh man, that first piece is heavenly, right? A 10 out of 10 satisfaction.
The second one? Still really good, but maybe it's a 9. By the time you get to the third one, you're starting to get full, and the extra satisfaction you get just keeps dropping. That simple idea explains so much about why we buy what we buy.
So far, pretty much everything we've talked about has been focused on the here and now. But perhaps the single biggest economic question of our time asks us to lift our heads up and think about, well, tomorrow.
And that brings us to this huge concept, sustainable development. At its core, it's all about answering one profound question. How can we meet all of our needs today without totally messing things up for the people who come after us? It's about finding that balance between living well now and making sure future generations can do the same.
And pulling this off is a massive balancing act. Real sustainability isn't just about the environment. Think of it like a 3-legged stool. You need all 3 legs for it to be stable. You need social progress, like good health and education. You need economic growth, so people have jobs. And, of course, you need to protect the environment. If any one of those legs gets wobbly, the whole thing can fall over.
Now, this isn't just some vague, nice-to-have idea. To make it a reality, leaders from all around the world actually agreed on 17 specific sustainable development goals. They cover everything you can imagine, from ending poverty to ensuring clean water and protecting our oceans. It's a shared global blueprint for a better future.
And that brings us right back to where we started. It brings us back to you. Because from the food you eat, to the clothes you buy, to the way you get to work, every single choice is an economic choice. And each one, no matter how small it seems, sends ripples out into the world, shaping the bigger picture for all of us. So the question isn't just, what is economics? The real question is, what part will you play in it? Thanks for watching.